はい。皆さんおはようございます。Good morning, everybody. 今日はですね、国際関係論の2つ目のアプローチですね。国際法を取り上げます。We're going to look into international law as a second approach in this course. And we're going to start from some easy basics, but it's going to get a little difficult towards the end. 最初、簡単な話から始めますけど、最後にちょっと難しくなってきますんで。で、ですね、ちょっと画面共有ね。Share the screen. Okay, so that's our topic. Just going back to the basic diagram that I always show you. ここの僕の国際関係のイメージ、舞台の中で、これですね、今日は国際法3つの装置の一つです。簡単に言うと、国際関係のあり方についてのルールを定めたものですね。で、最初のテーマだった国際政治史では、この500年間世界中でいかにね、上の上位権威がない社会で、国家間の争い、特に戦争が絶えなかったかっていうのを見てきたと思います。We saw in the last few classes how the history of international politics was about a lot of wars. And it's kind of natural to next look into international law. And there's a reason for that. After having seen the many wars that humankind has fought over the last few centuries, because international law first originated from the let's say dire need for everyone to look into how we can control a little bit the act of war, because it was so disastrous to everyone. So we're going to start from basics here. Because international law is one kind of law, we're going to look into the basic question of what is law in the first place. そもそも論として法とは何かという基本的なことから始めます。一般に社会で人が一緒に暮らしていく上で、いろんなルールの体系があるわけですね。So, in order for society to work at all, there are systems of rules that people are supposed to follow or respect. And those are generally known as social norms. A very generic term is all kinds of social norms. What social norms are there? どんな社会規範？まず道徳がありますよね。常識的にわかりますね。There are morals, there are ethics, kind of similar to morals. There are also simply customs that we all, not all of us, but many of us follow. Depends on which area or country we live in. But these are all social norms. And then there is law. 極めて一般的に法っていうのも一つの社会規範ですね。で、法の特徴は何か what distinguishes law from other social norms like ethics or customs? Law is closely related, or it always involves, it involves giving rights to people. We're looking at law in the domestic sense, in the municipal sense. Just imagine the laws, system of laws of your own country. Japan for many of you. So law accords rights to us. It also puts obligations on us. And it has a system of, normally it has a system of sanctions and enforcement whenever obligations are not met. 義務を履行しない人はこれ制裁を科すっていう話、そういうシステムが通常ありますよね。And this is very similar to give a simple analogy, it's similar to the game of baseball. 野球のに似てるんですよ。Guess why it's similar to baseball? because you have a system of rules, a set of rules for baseball, don't you? For example, pitcher the pitcher has a certain obligation, doesn't he? He has a very strong right. He has the right. He is the only person who can throw the ball in the game, first of all. すごい権利ですよね。But he also has an obligation, he or she, I mean. He or she has to throw, what does she have to do? 3 strikes before she throws 4 balls. So that's an obligation for the pitcher. And this is, and the other players, of course, have their own rules to follow. And every ball player follows these rules, don't they? You don't normally see somebody who goes against the rules. And why is that? Because somehow the system of rules for the ball game is enforced. You know, if somebody decides not to follow the rules, he or she will be ordered to step out. You see, he'll be kicked out. And why am I giving this analogy? It's because you think of the game of baseball to imagine, you know, the more basic question of why in the first place do we need law? You know, what purpose does it serve in society? そもそも法の目的というのは何かと。What is the objective of law? Please think about it. This is a very basic question. I tend to think my own way of looking at it is there are 2 basic or major objectives. 2つ大きな目的があると思うんですけどね。誰か想像してみません。野口さん何だとWhat is one major objective of the system of law? What do we have it for? Just give a guess.
To build a peaceful society.
Sorry? もう一度言ってください。
To build a peaceful society. To build a peaceful society.
Yeah, to maintain peace in society. Yeah, that's a good question, I think. In other words, I think, you know, you go back to the example of the ball game. You know, why do we have all these? Well, it's for everybody to enjoy the game, of course, but in order to, you know, have the game proceed orderly, you know, and so it's to maintain order. You know, that's common to the ball game and to society. Okay, but there's another, maybe more important objective of law, and I would say that, can anybody give a guess? 中西君どうですか？まあ秩序を維持するっていうことも大事だけど、もう一つもっとある意味大事な方の目標、なんでしょうかね。まあもう難しく考えないで答えてくれない、難しいですかね。正義を実現するってことなんですよね。It's to uphold justice. That's a very basic, fundamental objective of law. Justice, I mean, we can discuss justice for hours on end. This is a big topic, but I'll just leave it at that at this stage. Now, in order to you know, achieve these 2 basic objectives, what does law do? You know, what is it more specifically? What does it provide? And in order to maintain order, it provides governing institutions. 統治機構、まあ、ちょっと難しい、堅苦しい話ですけどね、基本ですから、いろんな統治機構、まあ、わかりますよね、国内の社会を見てると、政府があって、裁判所があって、行政があって、国会があってて、そういういろんな統治機構で、その下にまたいろんなさまざまな行政機関、そういうものを法がまあ定めるということになってますね。それから、in order to achieve justice, law provides for human rights. To put it very simply, I'm simplifying things a lot. とっても大事ですね。これ、人権を守るって我々がね、国民が通常は主権者ですから、我々の人権を守るっていうのが一番大事な方の目的ですね。で、これ僕の整理に過ぎないんですけどね。で、これ今、皆さん気がついた人いるかもしれない。僕、方法って言ってますよね。法律って言葉はまだ使ってないですよね。なんでかっていうと、あえて、法は一般概念で、法律っていうのはね、法のかなりの部分を、成分化したものだと思ってください。ちょっと概念を分けて考えて。So, we're talking about we're talking about law and we're talking about legal codes. Law which is put into writing, to put in black and white, and this depends. We're looking at the Japanese system of law, but I think it's the same more or less in many countries. And again, I think almost any country, there is a legal code which stands above all other codes. And that's, of course, the Constitution. これは分かりますよね。中学、高校の公民で習ったようなことです。憲法っていうのは最高法規で、他の法律のすべての上に立ってるわけですね。で、憲法はだから大きく分けてまさにさっき言った法の目的、統治機構と人権、大きくその2つを規定しています。All constitutions, I believe, provide for provisions, basic principles, or guidelines along the two major objectives, governing institutions and human rights. Okay? And with this overall framework in place, what does this whole thing try to achieve? What is its ultimate goal? We've already discussed objectives and ends. What does this all add up to? What is the ultimate goal? 究極目標なんですかね。はい。ちょっと抽象論かもしれませんけど、誰か、下南さん何だと思います？こういうの、この挙句の果てに全部、結局何が実現するためか。ちょっと抽象的で答えにくいですかね。I would say, well, for one thing, it's to achieve security for everybody, living in society. Also to somehow, gain prosperity, hopefully for everybody. And, all that ultimately comes down to everybody's happiness. Okay, so we're getting a bit abstract here, but this is my own image of what law is all about. Now you should keep in mind, 一つね、すごい正し書きを言わなきゃいけません。こういうきちっとした法律の体系があればね、じゃあこの目標全部達成できるか、達成できません。法はそのためのものすごく大事なフレームワークなんですけど、万能ではないんですよね。You have to remember, law is not a panacea. I would say it's the most important framework for society, but it's not almighty, but nonetheless, it's very important. And I think you've all heard of this notion of the rule of law. 法の支配という概念、皆さん聞いたことあります。何かっていうと、今まで言ったようなこの法体系のが大体機能してる。統治機構が有効に働いてて、人権が実際に尊重されて守られてると。ほぼね、そういう状態のことを法の支配と言いますね。ただ、その六法全書のね、法律全部揃ってたって、実際に機能してないとダメですからね。そういうふうによく言います。で、それ実際に基本的に機能している国のことを法治国家と言います。So there's these rather academic jargons, rule of law and law-governed nation, a law-governed nation, I think we can translate it in other ways, is a nation where on the whole, largely law, the rule of law is established, and these objectives are on the whole, if not entirely, met by a system of law. Okay, so this is all just what we say in Japanese, maeoki, just a few words in advance. We now come to our main theme for today. What is international law? Now, who is this guy? We're looking at the basic question, what is international law? Okay, as opposed to municipal law is the word, I think, technical word for laws which govern a specific region only or a specific country only. 我々、普通法律で想像する場合って、日本の法律を想像しますよね。国内法です。別の言い方して。英語ではミニシパルローって言うんですけどね。それと別の体系なんですね、国際法っていうのは。A system of international law which governs the international society. To put it very simply, it's a system separate from the systems of municipal law govern specific countries. Okay. And I'm just asking you to look into why international law, how it came to pass. This person, Hugo Grotius, was a Dutch, I think he was a diplomat first, and he became, he's now called the father of international law. I think he wrote, among other books, this book called On the Law of War and Peace. He wrote this out of his own experience through the 30 Years War, if you remember. 30年戦争ってね、it was a religious war, 宗教戦争でしたね、16世紀のヨーロッパで。とっても悲惨な戦争だったんですね。で、彼は自分でそれを体験したらしいです。その悲惨な体験の中からね、out of his own experience, I think it was a very traumatic experience personally for him. He, I think, thought very hard on how we can try and bring some order to even wars. I think his main conclusion was it's not going to be possible to prevent all wars, but there should be some rules which apply to the act of war. He said some wars may be justified. 正当な理由がある戦争も中にはある。でも正当な理由のない戦争というのは禁止されるべきと。So I think the first basic principle that he tried to establish was wars should be banned except where there is a justifiable reason to wage war. And that there should be, in case war has to happen, there should be certain rules applied to it. For example, I think nowadays this is well established. Civilians should not be harmed. For example, 民間人ってね、直接やっぱり保護されなきゃいけないし、捕虜はちゃんと人道的に取り扱わなきゃいけないとかね。Prisoners of war should be treated humanely, or whenever a country wants to enter into war with another country, it has to give the other party notice. It has to make a declaration of war before it starts shooting. 宣戦布告はちゃんと事前にしなさいとかですね。まあ、そういったルールですね。OK。So, もうすごく駆け足で話します。国際法の体系っていうのは、ね、この戦争について何かもう少しでもルールを作らなきゃいけないんじゃないかという、グロティウスさん、その他の人たちの努力から始まったんですね。で、その後もうものすごく走っております、話は。これ今さっき、だいたい17世紀の話ですけど、18世紀、19世紀、それから20世紀とね、もう時代を経るにつれて、ものすごくいろんな国際法の体系というのは広がってきます。最初は海洋法とかですね、 initially, I think in the 17th, 18th century, they came up with rules, not just about war, but rules governing the territorial seas, law of the seas. You know, it was first, there was no rule in place as to what amount of sea each country can, you know, exert its control over. Now it's more or less established that the territorial waters are to be up to 12 nautical miles from its shores. I think everybody knows that, but that was not the case. There were no rules in place. That was one of the very primitive international laws which came into place gradually over the years, that more or less everybody agreed that it should be 12 nautical miles, the range of territorial waters, or the law of treaties, you know, international agreements are generally, I'll come to this later, are generally called treaties, but there should be certain rules or practices, you know, put in place for treaties, how they should be discussed and concluded, and so on and so forth. Also on diplomatic relations. 外交の話ってまたこの授業後で取り上げますけどね、外交関係についてどういうルールを定めるか、外交官はどういうふうな権利を与えて、どういうふうに切除するかとかですね。まあいろんな、それから特に19世紀になってからは、その通商関係法ですね。I mean, particularly in the 19th century, there came up all sorts of international rules concerning international trade, commercial relations, and so on. You know, rules, international agreements concerning science and technology, international commerce, and all these areas made for an increasingly large and complex system of international rules and laws. Basically because the need for international cooperation gradually increased over the years. いろんな分野における国際協力が必要になってきて、そのためのルールのシステムというのはもう加速度的に発達したわけです。それにつれて、まあ、いわゆる国際機構ですね、国際法とともにいろいろ発展します。So along with the development of international law, the system of international organizations also develops with increasing pace, particularly towards the 19th century and of course even more so in the 20th century. So that's a very brief outline of the history of international law. すごい駆け足でした。それでbut coming to the main theme of today, and for you to keep in mind for next week and the week after that is, well, we briefly looked at two very different systems of law, municipal law and international law. 国内法と国際法。概略話しましたね。その2つって一体何が共通してて何がどう違うのかということをちょっと考えてみたいと思います。はい。基本目的は同じ法ですからね。As far as the two systems of law are both systems of law, their fundamental objectives, there's a lot in common, I would say. So as I said at the outstart, both systems, I think, are meant to, you know, put in place a system of order that's common to both systems. Also to achieve justice in a way is common to both. But I would say it's more interesting to look at what the differences are, okay, despite the fundamental commonalities. 重要な目標は同じだとしても、重要な違いを見た方が面白いと思います。で、この表をお見せしますね。 this will be the only table that I'm going to show you today. It's a table about the differences between the two systems of law. Okay. So we have municipal law, 国内法, and international law, 国際法. Now, what should we look at in terms of looking at the differences? First of all, who or what is the main agent? 誰が主体なのか、その法のですね。主体って言ったときにどういう意味かっていうのは、いくつか意味あるんですけどね、その一つは法を作る主体が誰か。So one sense in which we consider the agent, the major agent of law is in the sense that who or what is the owner of that system of law, or who makes that law. Can you, I think some of you are already starting to imagine who that is in the case of municipal law, or who, to what or to whom is that system of law applied? 誰が法の適用を受けるかという意味もありますね。And in both senses, I think can somebody guess? 小林さん、国内法の主体は誰でしょうか？
日本国民じゃないんですか？
まあね、日本については日本国民。国民って要するに我々ですよね。So she said Japanese people, more generally, it's persons, isn't it? Human beings, ourselves. So this is simplifying things a lot. There are other entities or agents, of course, like legal persons, which are normally called companies, are also subject to municipal law. But the main agent is always the person. So who can guess what the main agent of international law is? 北村さんどうですか？
国家とか。
ですね。Okay, it's the state which is the main agent. Again, there are other agents, to be sure. International organizations can also be sometimes agent of international laws. Individual persons can, again, not very often, but sometimes be subject to international law directly. But by far, the main agent is the state. Okay, and there are, as you know, close to 200 states in the world right now. So that's very different. The second perspective is whether or not there is a superior authority to these agents. このエージェント、主体の上に立つ上位権力があるのかどうかですね。And we've already seen this in the classes in international politics. In the case of municipal law, this is in theory, I think there shouldn't be, because we 我々国民って一番の権威ですよね。At least in democracies, we the people are supposed to be the supreme authority ourselves, but in actual practice, or in order to make that system work, we come under the government, don't we? We submit ourselves to the system of law and to the legal system. So in that sense, we are subject to a superior authority, although we ourselves, human beings, are in democracies are the final authority. But let's say in terms of the power relationship, we do submit ourselves to the state. いいですか? Whereas in international law, there is no superior authority. That's the primary the defining characteristic of international society where international law is put in place. So the third point of consideration is whether or not or to what extent there is enforcement. どれぐらい強制力が働いているか。Somebody can give me an answer for municipal law. 国内法の場合、強制力どれぐらいありますかね。片岡さんどう思います？
弱いよ、強い。
強いですね。
あ、
うん日本の中見たらよくわかるでしょ。法律すごく強く実施されてますよね。守らないとやられますよね。僕も昨日高速道路でスピード違反しちゃいましたけど、もうしっかり取られちゃいましてね。すごく強いんですよ。ところが国際法どうですかね。はい。大島さんどう思います？国際法の場合。もうこれほとんど誘導尋問ですけど。
弱い。
弱い。はい。It's very, very weak, or I wouldn't say very weak, but compared to domestic societies, compared to national systems, it is weak. Okay, just keep that in mind. We'll come into, and why it's weak, it has a lot to do with the absence of superior authority. You can guess that. 結構だからこの2つになってますよね。上位権力がないから弱いんですよね。国際法の強制力っていうのは。それから、this is a bit of another extension to this basic argument. Is self-help permitted? Or, what are we talking about? 自力救済って何のことか。要するにその主体がですね、法の主体が自分の利益が、侵害されていると感じた場合、自分を救済することは認められているかどうか。例えば何かというと、なんだろう。伊藤君ちょっと聞きますが、来てます、伊藤君。伊藤君来てたら返事してください。来てないかな。じゃあ、誰でもいいです。山本君、どうですか？自分、なんか物盗まれたとしますね。自転車盗まれたとしますね。自分で追っかけて取り返しますか？
そうですね。
うん。
基本的にはしないかなと。あんまやんないかなと。
そうするとどうします？
とりあえず、警察に連絡するってのが。
警察ね、そうですよね。だから警察がやってくれるんでね。自分でやりませんよね。それからいろんなケースあるんですけど、自力救済ってね、国内社会では原則ダメなんですよ。やっちゃいけないんですよね。もうその場で急に鉄砲つけられてね、殺されそうになったら、正当防衛でやり返すっていうのは、それは例外的にいい場合もあるんですけどね。ちゃんと法律的な利益を侵害されてそれを回復したい場合っていうのはちゃんと上位権力がありますから、警察とかね、裁判所もあるし、自分で実力行使逆にしたら怒られるんですよね。原則禁止です。Self-help is prohibited in domestic societies because the authority will normally is there to take care of it. Okay. Whereas in international society, it is permitted in principle because there is no superior authority to help you. Sometimes there is authority to help you to some extent, but in the final resort, states have to help themselves. That's the basic characteristic of international society. And the last point of view is, what do we mean by consent? 同意って何のこと？要するに、in the case of municipal law, does the person have to consent to be subject to law? or in the case of international society, does the state have to give consent to be bound by international law? わかります? And the answer again here is very distinct between the two systems. The person does not have to give consent. Can you guess why? 三輪さん来てますか？三輪さん来てます？
はい。
三輪さんは日本人として生まれて、それで日本の法律かかっちゃってますよね。で、それって嫌って言えます？
言えないです。
言えないですよね。だから日本の法律は生まれたら、日本人として生まれたら自動的にかかっちゃうんだよね。嫌でも好きでも何でも嫌いでもしょうがないんですよね。だから、once you're born an American, Jocelyn, for example, you're American, you have to come under US law. And in fact, now that you're living in Japan, you have to come under Japanese law. You know that, don't you? So whether you like it or not. So municipal law does not require consent by the person or by the legal person. Whereas in international law, it is required. The state, if it doesn't want to be subject to a certain treaty, it doesn't have to be. The state, you need consent by the state to apply the big part of international law to the state. 同意しない国際法には縛られないんですよね、国家はね。これ例外はあるんですけど、もちろんね。まあ、これ非常に基本的な2つの法体系の違いを今、類型的に申し上げました。Okay. Any questions up to here? Now, これだけ見てくると国際法ってなんか弱いですよね。国内法に比べて。上位権威がないから、そもそも強制力が弱いし、必ずしも国家の利害が侵害されても助けてくれない場合が多いから自分でやんなきゃいけないとかね。それからね、そもそも縛られるかどうか国が合意しなければ縛られないと。合意しない場合どうするんだって。だから法の体系として弱いと思いません？So in view of all of this, I think you have the impression that the system of international law is quite weak compared to municipal law systems. In fact, one could argue, can we call that a system of law at all if it's that weak? そんなに弱いんだったら法体系としての意味があるかという議論さえあり得るんですよね。だけども、Nonetheless, over the last few centuries, there's no denying that there is a very expansive and developed system of law in place. 厳然たる法の体系として非常にこの何百年出来上がってきているものがあるんですよね。それにもかかわらず。And in fact, international law does work in most cases, in many cases. If not all cases, because most of the countries, it's not abided by all the countries all the time, but it is abided by most of the countries most of the time. Okay, and that's because most countries, or I would say all countries, generally accept that it's in their interest. It's a good idea to follow the rules most of the time, okay? Although they decide not to follow some of the time, okay? Now, the next question, we're coming to the next most important question, which relates to what I'm going to ask you to do next week and the week after, which is as an extension of the differences. Now hold on. before that, sorry, I skipped one important page here. We're going to look into a little bit of the specifics of international law. What does international law consist of? Okay. Again, very generally, you've all heard of treaties. 条約って言葉の具体的な意味、皆さん想像つきますよね。国際法が条文としてちゃんと書かれたものですね。Treaties are written international law. They're put in black and white on documents, on paper, and they bind consenting parties only. 条約っていうのはその加盟した参加した国だけを縛ります。まあ、当たり前のことですけどね、参加してない国は縛らないんですね。で、条約には、まあ、簡単に皆さん分かるとおり、二国間の条約、いろいろあります。Many treaties which are concluded between two countries only. We call them bilateral treaties. There are many of them, but there are also multilateral treaties. 多国間の条約も、こっちはまあ最近になればなるほど増えてきています。And this could range from treaties between 3 countries and up to treaties among almost all the countries, like the United Nations Charter, that covers almost all the countries of the world. But nonetheless, we draw a distinction between bilateral and multilateral, okay? And they all bind only the parties which are party to it, okay? But there are other types of international law. For one thing, there is customary law. 慣習法っていうのはですね、written じゃないんですよ。書かれてないんです。だけども、一般的にほとんど全ての国が、まあ、法の効力を持つとみなしている、まあ、慣習というのが、まあ、あります。で、まあ、例はいろいろあるんですけどね。さっき言った領海はだいたい12海里だってことにしましょうと、自分の海岸からね。っていうのは、まあ、最近になっても条文化されてるんですけど、国際海洋法条約っていうのは、それができるまではの間も、でも慣習法としてだいたい成立してたんですね。どっかの条約文に書かれてないけど、みんなが受け入れてる場合、慣習法になります。There's also general principles of law, 法の一般原則。まあ、これ、ちょっとテクニカルな話になりますけどね、慣習法とはまた違って、これも条文に書かれてないけれども、まあ、みんなが守る原則。例えば、真偽誠実の原則なんてあるんですけど、the general principle of good faith, whenever you agree to something, you normally are expected to respect it in good faith. That kind of thing is what we call general principles of law. And there's another category of non-written international, which is peremptory law. What does that mean? 強行規範ってなんですね。これも必ずしも条約文に書かれてないんだけれども、これはもうどの国も絶対守らなきゃいけないというのは少しあるんだね。例えば何だと思います？まだ当ててない人誰だと。有島君、なんか想像つきますか？書かれてないけど、これは絶対守らなきゃいけないって。ちょっと想像つきにくいかな。いや、例えば今、ほら、プーチン大統領のロシアがやってること。あれ、はっきり言って侵略戦争ですよね。ウクライナに対する。あれやっちゃいけないんですよ。で、じゃあ、どっか世界の法律でね、侵略戦争をやっちゃいけないって書いてあるじゃん。まあ、実は国連憲章に似たことは書いてあるんですけどね。でも、その前からですね、侵略戦争はもう絶対にどの国もやっちゃいけませんと。やりたくてもやっちゃいけませんと。まあ、どの国も自分は侵略するんですっつって戦争しませんからね。でも、それは実体的にそうだとしたら、これ禁止なんですよ。まあ、例えば 大量虐殺とかね、ジェノサイドって言いますけどね、それからもっと昔からやってる奴隷制度とかね、Another example of parental law is slavery. I mean, no countries can no longer do any form of slavery, no matter what, because it's against parental law. It's established, although there's no written code against slavery. It was not the case a few centuries ago, but now I think after the 20th century, it's a no-no, no matter what. That kind of thing is what we call parental law. Okay, but these are unwritten. These are unwritten, but it binds all nations. But I would say all these three put together are still rather, exceptions. Almost all international law are put into treaties, okay, which only bind the consenting parties. Now we're coming to the main question for today, which is what points of contact, or what are the interests? 国際法と国内法の接点って何だろうと。はい、皆さんちょっと考えてくださいね。ここ大事ですから、来週、再来週につながりますので。どういう意味か、つまり一見すごく違う法体系ですよね。こっちは国内社会だけだし、主に人が対象。で、こっちは国際社会で、主に国が対象。なんかすごい違いますよね、対象も範囲もね。だけど、その2つって接点はあるんだろうか、あるいは重なる部分があるんだろうかと。Do they overlap to any extent? This is again a legal question. Now, I think there's no question about it. There's a lot of overlap. 実際に両方の法体系が関わる問題の領域って、そりゃいっぱいありますよね。例えば何ですかね。例えば、まあ想像つくかな。国際経済関係ってもう、それはもうとっても重複しますよね。だって簡単に、まあ、最近いろんなフリートレードとかね、エコノミックパートナーシップアグリーメントっていっぱいできてますよね。TTP とか、まあ、今、国際経済の授業じゃないんで、細かい問題入りませんけどもね、ICEP とかね、いろんな地域ごとに、すごく皆さんニュース聞いてれば、もういっぱいあるの知ってるでしょ。それはなぜかって言ったら、国際経済関係ってそれぞれの国の国内の経済にも直接関わってますよね。ものすごく。There's no question about it. There's a lot of overlap in terms of economic relationships, international commerce, trade and investment, all of those things, on which both international law and domestic law, municipal law are concerned. So that's one big area of overlap or of intersection. And there's also, this is a rather technical point, but think of your own selves. There's this area called private international law, 国際司法。これ何かっていうとですね、this is on more or less concerning the individual person. For example, ask one of yourselves, 下南さん、前にしたかな。下南さんいいですか。これ、実際にはそうじゃないけど、あなたのお父さんは、アメリカ人だと思ってください。いいですか。で、ところが、日本に住んでるんですけどね、アメリカ人。で、ブラジルになんか家を持ってると考えてください。ね。だから、英国の人で、日本なんだけども、不動産を B 国に持ってると。で、将来お父さん亡くなった時にね、あなたはまあお子さんの一人として、そのブラジルの家を相続するわけですよ。その時に、下南さん、その時、なんか税金払わなきゃいけないって知ってます？何税って言うんですかね。 皆さんにとってはまだ遠い将来の話かもしれないが、あまり心配してないと。相続税って払うんですよね、どこの国でも。ね、親が亡くなって、何でもいいです。相続、財産、不動産ね。もちろん兄弟と分けるんですけど、でも、丸ごともらえないんですよ。国にも相続税何割も払うんですよ。で、今言ったケースの場合ね、お父さんアメリカ人でブラジルに不動産、その家の相続税ってどこに払うと思います？日本でしょうか？お父さん日本に一緒に住んでるか？だからそれともアメリカでしょうかね？アメリカ人だから。あるいはブラジルでしょうかね？家があんのはブラジルだから。ということでね、まさかね、3つの国から全部払えって言われたらたまりませんよね。どっか1箇所にしてくれですよ。で、そういうことを、例えばですよ、ルールを決めると。So, I'm sorry I skipped, explaining this in English, but we're talking about cases where an individual's right or obligation is covered by more than one country's laws. For example, if you're paying inheritance tax to something you've inherited from your father who passed away, if your father was an American but having a house in Brazil, do you have to pay your inheritance tax to the United States or to Brazil? You don't want to pay both, do you? So there's this system of rules which tries to coordinate and adjust that so that you don't have to pay twice the same thing. これちょっとテクニカルな話ですけどね、これ民事的な問題だけじゃなくて、刑事的な問題についても当てはまります。I mean, for example, if you're on a ocean liner, enjoying your cruise, and your wallet is stolen by somebody on the ship, and that robber happens to be an American who, is on his way to, again, Brazil. That ship is heading to Brazil. Which country's police will look after that incident? Is it Japan, where the ship started sailing, or is it the United States, or is it Brazil, or indeed is it Peru, which is where the ship belongs to? All ships have their own nationality as well. So that kind of thing, in order so that no confusion arises, there is a system of rules which is called private international law. Okay, but this is, mind you, a rather minor area, compared to the whole issue of the intersections. The more important question arises where there is a conflict between the two systems, and what kind of case are we looking at? Well, for example, there's the wartime labor dispute issue. ニュースに逃がしてましたよね。最近日本と韓国の関係、岸田総理がね、韓国行って、つい昨日、一昨日でしたかね、改善してますけどね、これ長い間、日本と韓国の間のものすごく厄介な係争事項ですね。戦争中に当時のね、韓国の人たちが日本のいろんな企業に結構強制労働を課せられてたっていう問題、いまだにくすぶってて、で、これでこれについて、国家間の協定、条約ではもう問題は解決したことになってるのに、韓国のそれぞれのね、人たちがやっぱり個人的に訴訟をずっと起こしてて、韓国の裁判所は日本の企業に賠償を命じたというようなことが何年前かにあったんですね。で、それは何かというと、韓国国内、最高裁判所が判決出しちゃったらもう最終ですよね。韓国の国内の方と、それから日本と韓国の間の何十年前にも結んだ国問題、だから国内法と国際法が対立した厄介なケースなんですね、これね。Sorry, in order to save time, those of you who are interested in this case between Japan and Republic of Korea, you may wish to look it up afterwards. it's a case, again, this other question where, again, there's a conflict between the two systems of law, accession of Palestine to UNESCO. I raise this because I was involved in this myself. これアメリカが関わってんですよね。So for Jocelyn to understand this involves the United States. What happened, I think, about 10 years ago in UNESCO is Palestine was accepted as a member country to UNESCO. It will never be accepted to the United Nations in New York because Palestine only has an observer status at the UN, but and the United States and Israel, of course, will not agree to Palestine being given a member country status in the UN. But because the United States has a veto power in the UN, but at UNESCO, which is one of the one of the UN system organizations, the US nor the other P5 countries don't have veto power. So by majority vote, Palestine became a member of UNESCO about 10 years ago. And of course, Israel as well as the United States objected to this. And the US went as far as leaving UNESCO as a member. And so as that was because of a municipal law in the United States, which prohibits the US government to give any financial assistance to an international organization which gives any formal status to Palestine. There's that kind of law in the United States. So the US government, although it wished to remain in UNESCO, had to leave UNESCO because of that domestic provision. But this went against the United States' obligation to pay its dues to UNESCO. So again, here there was a conflict between the two systems of law. Another important area is even when there is no direct conflict between the two systems of law, there may more often be conflicts between one system of law and domestic policy. And this happens very often. 特に有力な国、国内法に直接触れなくても、国内政策ですね。法と政策って違う次元の話ですからね。法には触れなくても、その時のその政府の政策に反するようなことが国際法で起きる場合、これもままにあるわけです。例えば何かっつったらね、これ最近、もう5年か6年前、中国が南シナ海とか東シナ海で、海の上のね、島の領有権を主張してて、それが南シナ海の場合、東シナ海は日本とですけどね、南シナ海の場合は、フィリピンとかタイとかブルネイとかとね、領土紛争があるんですよね。で、これフィリピンが中国を相手取って、オランダにあるんですけど、常設国際仲裁裁判所ってなんですね。そこに訴えたケースがありましてね、この時はちょっと若干特殊な事情から中国もその訴えを受けて立ったんですね。で、裁判所はフィリピンの勝訴させる判決を出して、The PCA, the Permanent Court of Arbitration, ruled in favor of the Philippines, who took China to court related to its territorial dispute over certain islands in the South China Sea. And the PCA ruled in favor of the Philippines. So that was international law. There was a ruling, a formal ruling by an international court. But as you can imagine, the Chinese government is not accepting it because it goes against their policy. Their policy is those islands in dispute are, of course, from China's point of view, China's sovereign territory. So there's nothing anybody can do about it. They just don't accept the ruling. And there's this other very high-profile issue which involves Japan, the right of collective self-defense. Does anybody know anything about this? 集団的自衛権。皆さん聞いたことあります？ニュース見てる人は聞いたことあるかもしれないね。I don't know. Miss Lin, have you ever heard about this concept, right of collective self-defense?
No, I haven't heard about it.
Sorry, say that again.
I haven't ever heard about it.
You've
so-
never heard of it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me explain a little bit. The right of collective self-defense is the right of all nations, all countries, to not just defend itself when it is attacked, but to participate in a collective defense, which is just think of the Japan and the United States. Japan and the United States are allies. You know, we have the treaty, the security treaty, bilateral security treaty. So it obligates both of our countries to enter into military conflict with any country which decides to attack not just ourselves, but when it attacks the other countries. So the United States is obliged to defend Japan when Japan is attacked, even when the US itself is not attacked. So that's what we call collective self-defense. And this applies to not just two-country arrangements, but it applies to arrangements between many more countries. NATO is one thing, of course. When any one country of NATO is attacked by an external force, all the NATO countries are obliged by international agreement to come to the rescue of that country. And it just happened that Ukraine is not a NATO member, so the NATO is not formally involved in that war. And this poses a very difficult question for Japan because we have the famous Article 9 in our constitution, which basically bans us from entering into any war, except we have our right to defend ourselves when we are attacked. And we also have the right to defend ourselves when we are not attacked directly, but when our ally is attacked. But because of our constitution, Japan has so far not been able to exercise that right, because there's a very strong constraint by our constitution, and the official position of our government has been, we do have the right of collective self-defense because it is written in the UN Charter. All countries have the right of collective self-defense. And because Japan is party to the UN Charter, we have that right, legally speaking. But because of the constraint imposed by our constitution, we cannot, in fact, exercise that right. So we're in a predicament in a way. Although, to be exact, a few years ago, the government decided that we cannot leave it as that. We have to be more proactive in international affairs. And to a limited extent, we have to exercise collective self-defense. So there's been, it's already 5 or 6 years ago, the government introduced an amendment to our related laws. So we can, under very strict conditions, to a limited extent, now we do have possibility of exercising this right. Okay. Now, this is what I want you to do next week. I want you all to be legal experts. Okay. So I told you it's going to get a little difficult here. I'll try and explain to the extent possible. I'm going to ask you to choose the one topic. You see, there are 16 topics. 16個のこれ発表事項ありますね。There are 6 items relating to theory, and I'll come back to this later. There are 2 items which are fairly straightforward, specific legal instruments or laws, one domestic, one international, and there are other cases. There are 8 of them, very well-known cases throughout history, where the intersection of international law and municipal law was in some way contested. There was some dispute which related to, let's say, the applicability of both which system of law applies, should be given precedent or should take priority, becomes a difficult issue to solve. And all of these 8 cases involve some way or other a conflict between the 2 systems. Okay. So the theories, monism, what I think, and you understand the word monism, 一元論。国際法と国内法、どっちが基本的に優位なのか、あるいは同じなのか、ケースバイケースなのか。There have been over histories, different types of theories or different, philosophies. And the most primitive is that domestic law or municipal law should always take primacy. It should always come before international law. That's the first kind of monism. The second kind of monism is the other way around. It's that international law should always be superior to domestic law when there is a conflict. Okay, there's no problem when both systems, face the same direction, but very often they don't. Dualism is a theory which argues there's no problem. The 2 systems don't have any common areas. They govern very different situations, so there's nothing to worry about. The 2 separate systems. That's what dualism says. Coordination theory. I'm not going to go into detail because all the material, reading material in website. 今詳しくは申し上げませんけどね。This argues that the 2 systems are in principle equal. They should be seen on the same level. And where they come into conflict, there should be a system that the 2 can be all coordinated. All disputes can be solved by coordination. The 5th one is similar, but it's a different point of view. It argues that the 2 systems should somehow be harmonized. And I won't go into detail here. The 6th one is perhaps the most advanced. It was brought forward by a famous Japanese legalist. He called it neo-dualism. And I'll leave it to you to read the book to understand what it is. The 2 sets of laws, one is the Constitution of Japan. I'm going to show it to you. As I said, we have this famous Article 9. This is the English. Article 9 basically, Japan abandons the act of law as a right of the state. But there's this other article, Article 98, which basically says the Constitution, which means myself, I'm the supreme law of the nation. But it also says, the last sentence, the treaties concluded by Japan and established laws of nations shall be faithfully observed. So it says, for one thing, this constitution is the supreme law of Japan, but it also says treaties or international agreements should be faithfully observed, should be respected too. So then what happens when the two collide? There is a conflict between, and so it's unfair. Okay? And then in international, there is 条約法に関条約。Excuse me, everyone. I'm very sorry. For one thing, I was cut off. Can anybody hear me now? Okay. 北村さん、聞こえてますか？
聞こえてます。
And I also started speaking without showing you the screen. Sorry. I think I left it off here. So that's the famous Constitution of Japan, 憲法第9条ですね. So that's Article 9, which is about abandoning the act of war as a nation, and the relationship between the Constitution and treaties. Okay, it sort of says we have to respect both, but it doesn't say which should take precedence when there's a conflict. And this is in Japanese, and this is English, of the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. What do they mean by the law of treaties? This is the most important article, 27, which says a party may not invoke the provisions of its international law as its internal law as justification for its failure to perform a treaty. This rule is without prejudice to Article. Well, let's not worry about Article 46. That only refers to an exception to the rule. だからそのウィーン条約法に関するウィーン条約。This is a multilateral treaty. Almost every country in the world is bound by this, is a party to this multilateral treaty. And this 27条っていうのはとっても大事です、これ。すべての国はね、要するになんか国際約束履行できなくなったと。ね、条約の不履行。前に約束したんだけど、ね、その後事情が変化してね、都合が悪くなったから条約守れなくなったと、国際約束をね。そういう時に、そういう原則やっちゃいけないって言うんですよね。自分の国の中の事情、特に自分の国の国内法をね、が条約守るのを妨げるような国内法があると、あるいはその反するような国内法ができちゃったと。いうことを口実にしちゃいけないと、言い訳にしちゃいけないって言ってるんですよね。国内法が都合悪くなったからつって国際約束を守らないっていうのはいけませんよと。これものすごく大事な27条ね、ウィーン条約の。これは割とはっきりとその対立があった場合、矛盾があった場合に国際法の方が国内法より優先するんですよということを決めてるんですよね。So in a way, it's not surprising that in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, it basically says when there is a dispute between international and domestic law, international law takes precedence. That's what it says basically. Because this is a treaty, it's not surprising that it says that. Okay. Now these areこれ参考文献です。この4つの教科書、福井大学の図書館にもありますけどね、ウェブクラスにも載っけてます。 これ後で読んでください。理論についても、それから有名な事例についても、それぞれどれか選んでもらえたら書いてますので。Okay. There's also material in English that I picked out mainly from internet, listed on web class, okay, both on theory and on the specific cases. Okay, so I come back to this, sorry. The list of themes for next week. Can I kindly ask you to pick your own topic and put your name just beside the in between the Japanese and the English. You can kindly put your name. It's first come, first served. いいですか? Feel free to ask your questions if you have any. Bruno, you were very quick this time. Okay. 大島さん、ウィンブルドン号事件ね。
すみません。書けないんですけど、砂川事件でお願いします。
はい、あれ、砂川事件、誰か書き始めちゃったよ。
そうですか。じゃあ、じゃあ大丈夫です。ごめんなさい。ごめんなさい。名前が分かんなかった。今、ちょっとみんなの石丸です。
顔見えて。
石丸です。
石丸くんは、砂川事件希望したのね。で砂川事件誰か書き始めましたね。書き始めた人だけど、なんか、ちょんで終わっちゃってんだけど。
僕なんですけど、大丈夫です。
僕って言われても、名前言ってもらわないとわからないんだな。
中西ですけど、大丈夫です。他のにします。
あ、そう、
はい。
じゃあ、砂川事件石丸くんでいいですか？これ僕はごめんなさい。僕はね、ちょっとここからどう書いていいのか、よくわかんなくて、ごめんなさい。じゃあ、後で書いておきますので、砂川事件石丸くんね。他の人、なんか理論人気ないですね。理論が一番面白いんですよ。まあ、事例も面白いけど。
下南なんですけど、ポスター事件でお願いしたいです。
下南さんね。ちょっと待ってね。はい。今、テキスト。ちょっとね、ごめんなさい。下っていう字が出てこないから、この下の字になっちゃいますけど。石丸くん。じゃあ、ここ、砂川事件ね。はい。あと書いてない人、どんどん理論やってください。
すいません。
はい。
三輪なんですけど、二元論でお願いします。
宮さん二元論ね。はい。はい。まだの人います？ちょっと待って、今集計しますね。ちょっと待ってくださいね。Okay, so we have everybody except 伊藤君は今日欠席ですね。いませんよね。じゃあ、まあ、わかりました。あと、伊藤君は新二元論じゃあやってもらえばお願いしておきます。ちょっと待ってください。
島南さん、すいませんね。これちょっと字が違ってて、後で直しておきますから。じゃあこれ、皆さん、スクリーンショットよかったら撮っといてください。ちょっと時間あるんで、事例の説明ちょっとしましょうかね。ですね、ちょっと待って。ポスター事件っていうのはですね、何だったかな。簡単に言うと、これはいつの時代かな、19世紀ですね。アメリカって、ポスターさんっていうのは、なんか、ルイジアナ州でね、その地主だったんですね。その土地を昔、スペインからもらったっつってて、ところが、なんかその後、ルイジアナの領有権、フランスに移って、それからアメリカに割譲されちゃってっつって、それで、もうスペインからもらったっつっても、もうそれ無効だって言って、フォスターさんから土地巻き上げられちゃったんですね。でも確かにもうその時点ではスペインの領有権なくなってたんだけど、でもなんかアメリカとスペインが条約を結んでね、スペインの領有終わった後にあげた土地も、それはその人の、権利守んなきゃいけないからっつって、それは尊重しましょうっていうのは条約はあった。だからでもアメリカの国内ではね、フォスターさんの所有権認められなかったんですよね。これ国内法と条約、すなわち国際法とか対立した問題だったんですよね。それからアラバマの合事件というのはこれものすごい有名でね、これ誰になりました？リンさんね。これアメリカの南北戦争の時ですね。なんかイギリスはほら、外国として中立だったんですけども、なんか南軍が軍艦をイギリスに発注して、イギリスのリバプールで建造されて、しかも南軍に引き渡されちゃったっていうような事件があった。で、アメリカは怒って、アメリカっていうのは北軍の方ですよ、もちろん。北軍が勝ったんでね。イギリスにそれ中立義務違反じゃないかっつって訴えて、で、イギリスは、いや、すいませんでしたけど、国内でその手続き進めようとしたんだけどもね、そんな経済取引を簡単に政府がね、差し止めるわけにもいかないで、でも中立義務を果たせるように国内法を整備しようとしてたら作られちゃったと。そんな言い訳したんだけど、これ国内法と国際法とのね、対立ですよね。で、さっきのウィーン条約27条は、そんなの言い訳にしちゃいけないっていう原則定めてますよね。で、イギリス負けたんですよ。これはとても大事な判決。ちょっと時間ないからね、ウィンブルドン号っていうのは簡単に言うと、このどっかの船だったんですね。ポーランドの船かな。ポーランドの船で1920年ですね、その時ね。で、やっぱり軍目的だったんですかね、そのポーランドの船がドイツの国際運河を航行しようとして、キール運河って言うんだけど、で、キール運河はドイツにあるんですね。で、ドイツは戦争負けた後でしたけど、中立、ロシアとポーランドの紛争については中立を守ってたんですね。で、自分のところの運河だから、ポーランドの紛争当事国の一方の船が通るのは中立だからダメって言ったんだよね、ドイツがね。それで、ほら、何だったかな。もう一方の紛争当事国の方がみんな怒っちゃってね、それはけしからんと言って、中立だからって自由航行なんでね、国際運河だから、どの国の船も自由航行であるはずだって訴えたんで、自由航行っていうのは国際法の原則なんですね。ドイツは中立っていうのは国内法を盾に中立を守ろうとしたんだけど、そこでね、対立が生じたと、そんな話ですね。 あと全部説明してると長いんで省略しますが、皆さん関連文献読んでもらえたら分かりますので。Sorry, I don't have time to explain all these incidents, but it's for you to look into the material. They're all very interesting. They all concern some kind of dispute or conflict between the two systems of law, as I said. Any questions? なんか質問ありますか？はい。じゃあいいですね。どうもありがとう。じゃあ今日は、ちょっともうせっかくだからイマーシブビューに戻りましょうか。はい。お疲れさんでした。ちょっとスクリーンショット撮りますね。はい。Okay, if there's no questions, that's it for today. Thank you very much. See you next week.